We were talking to Ty Spalding, the publisher of CardinalSports.com, which is part of the Rivals.com network. NC State is hosting Louisville at 7 o'clock on a Friday night, rare Friday game, ESPN. Louisville is favored, even though the game's in Raleigh, which is always interesting. What's kind of been the vibe from the land of Louisville this week?
Well, the vibe down here is that um, not to look ahead to next week with the primetime Saturday night ABC slot with Notre Dame. I think a lot of fans have circled that game for a while when Jeff Brom was hired as to the first sellout in 4 years, and that game is sold out. So I think the vibe down here is, don't look ahead. Take care of the task at hand this week, and obviously the task at hand this week is it's not an easy one on the road at NC State, but the vibes down here are in a really good place. Louisville's 4-0 for the first time in a while. They haven't been 3-0 since 2016. They haven't been 2-0 in the conference since they joined the ACC, I believe. So they're off to a fiery start, that's for sure.
A lot of the talk in the offseason at NC State is that Brendan Armstrong, the quarterback, was reunited with his offensive coordinator, Robert Anae. I'm sure a lot of the talk at Louisville was probably the same way with Jack Plummer and Jeff Brom as his head coach. How seamless has that transition been? And it looks like pretty much Indiana is the only one that's been able to slow things down a little bit.
Yeah, so Jeff Brom and Brian Brom, the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach, they obviously had Jack Plummer at Purdue. And, when they took the job here, they pretty much handpicked Jack out of the portal as the guy they wanted for a one season rental per se. And Jack's familiarity with the offense and the system was a big part of it. Knowing that Jack was going to have to teach a lot of the offense, to the rest of the guys around him. And through 4 games, Jack's been pretty solid. The first game against Georgia Tech, he was a little shaky. He was throwing off his back foot a little bit. You could tell he was pretty nervous. But he settled in really nicely ever since. The Indiana game, as you mentioned, he had a great first half. Then the second half, Indiana started blitzing and bringing a lot of pressure, which rattled him and flushed him out of the pocket. So, I mean, he hasn't been perfect, and he certainly hasn't gone without making any mistakes. But he's been good enough. And when you have the skill position players like Louisville has, you don't need to be great. You just need to get the ball into the hands of Jawar Jordan, into the hands of Jamari Thrash, and let them make the plays. So, that's really what Jack has been honing in on is, just be good enough, get the ball to your playmakers and let them go and make plays.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that Jordan had transferred in from Syracuse. Somewhere along
Yeah.
the way, it was like it just kind of lost track of that. But when you think of all the transfers on offense, or defense, even if you want to throw them in, how much has the transfer portal, obviously some of these guys transferred and sat out a year under the old rules, but how much does that basically transform the 2023 Cardinals?
Yeah, I think they have upwards of 45, 46 newcomers on this year's team. And, you mentioned Jawar Jordan. He transferred from Syracuse to play for Scott Satterfield, and he was like a four-string running back his first year. He was like third string his second year here, and he just kind of kept his head down and really towards the end of last year got a chance with Tyon Evans and Travion Cooley and Jalen Mitchell, all three leaving the program. Jawar Jordan kind of had to play, and he just came through in a big way, and he just carried that momentum into this season. So he's a guy from Syracuse. Jamari Thrasher, receiver, is a guy from Georgia State who put up awesome numbers there. Had a 1,000-yard season last year at Georgia State. and Louisville beat out Auburn for him in the transfer portal. He was a guy that was highly sought after. You look at Kevin Coleman in the slot. He played for Dion at Jackson State last year. He was a guy that was a top 100 player coming out of high school on the Rivals ranking, so he's a big time talent. Both of Louisville starting tackles on offense are transfers. Left tackle Willie Tyler is a transfer from Rutgers, and right tackle Eric Miller is a transfer from Purdue. So yeah, there's definitely some transfers. And then on defense, the transfer that's made the biggest impact is edge rusher Stephen Herron from Stanford. He came over this past offseason. He's a guy that's originally from the Louisville area, so he's familiar with Brom, and he's made a big impact. And then the other guys on defense were guys that transferred in last year. Both the starting corners, Quincy Riley and Jarvis Brownlee, transferred in the last offseason, one from Florida State, one from Middle Tennessee. Their starting safeties, Devin Neals from Baylor, Cameron Kelly's from UNC. So yeah, the more I think about it, I thought the defense was mostly developmental pieces, but they've got their fair share of transfers as well.
Yeah, and NC State fans definitely know Cameron Kelly, but they're always happy to play him.
Yeah, no,
there's history there.
Yeah, he started the season as a backup, but Louisville's had some injuries at safety that kind of put him into an every down type of role, and he won ACC Defensive Back of the Week 2 weeks ago, 12 tackles, an interception, had a nice game. So yeah, he's passed the eye test for sure. So he hasn't done anything warranting a benching of that nature. So yeah, he's been solid.
Who you mentioned the pass rusher that transferred in from Stanford. I know there was another defensive end that had, I want to say, 7 sacks last year. What Galati? Galati.
Yeah.
So but who obviously some big time players moved on to the NFL from last year's defense. Who do you think are like the real difference makers that can make something happen?
Yeah, you mentioned Yasir Abdullah and Yaya Diaby. They were just absolute superstars on this Louisville defense a year ago. They're both in the NFL, and they were both great pass rushers. So Stephen Herron's a piece of the puzzle this year, as I mentioned, from Stanford. But the guy that has just been unblockable for most of the year has been Ashton Galati. He's third in the country in pressures and QB hurries according to PFF. He hasn't been able to get home a ton as far as getting the sack and getting the quarterback to the ground. But as far as winning a one-on-one battle, he's as good as it gets in the ACC. So he's on the other edge opposite Stephen Herron. Louisville's been okay with inside pressure. The key piece of that puzzle is Jermaine Lole. He came over from Arizona State last season, was really, really highly regarded out of the portal. Missed all of last year with an injury, came back again this year, played the first 3 games, and then missed last week due to an injury. So his status is kind of up in the air. He's a presence in the middle of that defense that, whether he's able to go or not will be one to watch. But those 3 guys on the defensive line. At linebacker, TJ Quinn is probably Louisville's best inside linebacker. He's a guy that hadn't played a ton in his first 2 years at Louisville, but has started this year and been really, really good for them. They've got a true freshman, Stanquan Clark, who also plays at inside linebacker. But really, this defense is they've just kind of been, held together by, duct tape almost. There's been times where you've wanted to, rip your hair out and fire the coordinator. But they're 4-0, so it's kind of hard to do that when you're 4-0. So this defense is still still a work in progress. It's definitely not as good as creating havoc as last year's was, which that was a record breaking defense. So obviously there a step back was expected, but this defense is still very much a work in progress.
Obviously, NC State fans are very aware of what Jordan can do on the kick return, having a 98 yarder a year ago for a touchdown. How do you see the rest of the Louisville special teams?
Yeah, yeah, they do. Jawar Jordan is a dynamic kick returner. Kevin Coleman is a punt returner. He hasn't broke one yet, but he's been very reliable. Um, they have a new punter and place kicker this year, and they have a rare instance where one person does both. Brock Travel said kicks and punts. He's been hit or miss. The first game of the year, he won Specials of the Week. And then against Indiana, he missed a chip shot and hit a 13-yard punt. So um, definitely hit or miss there. Um, the kick coverage has been pretty good, but as far as the kicking and punting, it's hit or miss.
Sure. Yeah, one of my theories for Friday is State needs to ugly the game up. Make it a little more low scoring. Try to create turnovers. Take advantage of a good crowd.
Yeah.
Uh, because I don't know if they could out pretty Louisville, but that's not really NC State style anyway. But can you anything that you hear from the Louisville players or coaches this week that makes you wonder about NC State?
I think the theme. The offensive line coach spoke to the media. Jeff Brom spoke to the media. I think the theme from the Louisville side is that they just really respect what Dave Doran's done there, and they respect his defense. I think more than anything. That your NC State is plays a different look. With their front seven there, and they've always had good linebackers. So I think for Louisville, a lot of the questions were directed, about the NC State defense and the different challenges they'll present. Um, especially in the front seven. How does Louisville continue to run the ball so well? How their offense stacks up there, and so I think really it's been NC State's front seven, their defense. Dave Doran and what he's done, and then obviously the crowd and the environment. This being Louisville's first true road game of the season, I'd say those are the three things that listening to the press conferences throughout the week. It's been honed in on just Dave Doran's teams are going to be ready. They're going to have a solid defense, and you can always expect a good crowd in Raleigh. So those are kind of the three things from the Louisville players and coaches that have kind of been a theme throughout the week.
Sure. I mean, the couple of games I always remember when Louisville came to town was when Lamar Jackson, obviously the year after he won the Heisman Trophy, and that arguably could be Dave Doran's best win. Some would argue the victory over Clemson, but that Louisville team with Lamar, even looking back, you realize there wasn't as many pro players around Lamar, but at the time, I mean, that was a very explosive offense, and Lamar was, basically on top of the world, and that was a Thursday night game. And then I actually remember when Brian Brom came to town, when he was the quarterback, and Mario Urrutia at wide receiver, and they had some dudes that year. Maybe Douglas was on that team, as the other receiver, and that was a very
Yep.
explosive Louisville attack that came to Raleigh. But in a way, I think NC State fans maybe look at Louisville as a replacement for Maryland in the sense of a little bit of a spicy rivalry in some ways, where State and Maryland didn't always like each other very much. And then with Maryland leaving, I think Louisville coming in, that kind of helped fill that void a little bit. And both schools being Adidas, both schools red and white. So I don't know if Louisville fans are aware, but State's doing the Adidas blackout with
Yeah.
the uniforms
Yeah.
in the dark. So that's going to be a little something different for Friday.
Yeah. No, I mean, Louisville's definitely aware of the blackout. I think most Louisville fans that have made the trip to Raleigh over the years have had really good things to say about the fans and the environment. Um, just a very good college football scene is just kind of everyone that's made the trip there. That's kind of seems to be the theme of it. Is just it's a great environment, a great college football fan base. So yeah, Louisville fans are aware of the blackout. They're aware of the sellout, and um, yeah, I think they know that this isn't going to be easy. That's for sure.
Sure. Once again, we were talking to Ty Spalding, who is the publisher of CardinalSports.com, which is part of the Rivals.com network. Where can people see your stuff, read your tweets, and things like that this week?
Yeah, you can. Our website's cardinalsports.com. As he mentioned, we're on the Rivals Network as well. On Twitter, you can follow us at U of L Rivals or at Ty Spalding. Yeah, so I won't be making the trip, but I'll be covering the game from home base here in Louisville, and it'll be a an interesting game, that's for sure.
Yeah, I haven't done my formal prediction yet, but I'm leaning towards a maybe a lower scoring game than most. I do think Louisville will probably win, but I could see it being more in the 20s than any kind of like a shootout type game. But we'll see. But I appreciate taking a few minutes tonight, and we'll see how this goes on Friday.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate it, and uh, good luck, and we'll catch up down the road, hopefully.